What's going on, guys, and welcome back to Touchdowns to Home Runs. My name is Bernie. Thank you for joining us today on the Touchdowns to Home Runs show. I hope that your day is going absolutely fantastic. Today, we're going to be going over some bold predictions for the Toronto Blue Jays in the upcoming 2021 MLB season. The way that it's going to work is I'll give a statement or a bold prediction. I'll give some reasoning behind it, and then I'll tell you if I actually think it's going to happen or not. So we got a whole list of them here, so let's get right into it. The first one that we have is Vlad Guerrero Jr. will hit 30 or more home runs in the 2021 season. Now, to me, this is a really interesting one because I think it's pretty safe to say that over the course of the past seasons that Guerrero has been in the majors, he's been pretty underwhelming. We know he has home run power, but he's found it really challenging to get any launch angle or elevation on the ball. Now, what's really interesting about Guerrero, though, and quite impressive as well, is for the type of ground ball hitter that he's also been at the top of the league in terms of exit velocity. Now, if you're not a baseball stat guy and you don't know what launch angle and exit velocity are, just know that for a ground ball hitter, the stats that Guerrero has put up are actually quite impressive. Now, with that being said, I've seen some pictures of Guerrero over the past little while looking a lot more slimmed down and still maintaining a lot of athleticism and muscle. Two guys in the past that I've briefly touched on past videos have done really similar things to Guerrero, where they struggle in their first few years in the majors, but then lose some weight, and all of a sudden they're right there in MVP talks. Those guys, Devers and Luke Voight. We saw what Luke Voight did last year in terms of losing a ton of weight in the last offseason, came into spring training in the best shape that he's been over the course of his entire career, and all of a sudden Luke Voight was one of the finalists for the American League MVP. I think that Guerrero is going to be able to maintain the power. I think that being him slimmed down, I think will allow him to create that launch angle and all of a sudden elevate the ball. With Springer, Semien, a ton of power in the lineup, I expect Bichette to really break through this year. I think Guerrero also has a lot more protection in the lineup that he's had in past years. And for that reason, I don't think pitchers will be able to give him as much off speed, pitch around him as much. And I think Guerrero is in a prime spot to have the best year of his young career so far. So for this prediction, I'm actually going to say that Guerrero will, in fact, hit 30 home runs. Next up, we have Ryu will win the American League Cy Young. Now, we made a big splash last offseason to get Ryu from the Dodgers, had to pay him a bunch of money. Struggled in the first bit of last season, but he was fantastic in the second half of last season and ended up finishing third in the American League Cy Young voting. The Blue Jays, first of all, have a lot of questions in this rotation and will need Ryu to really be solid if the Jays do want to make a push at winning the American League East Division. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen even if Ryu is good, but I think you definitely need a solid season from Ryu in your ace spot. With that being said, I think the American League in terms of pitchers is a lot weaker than the National League. Last year, Maeda and Shane Bieber were the only two players who finished ahead of Ryu, and you could argue that Shane Bieber and Jarrett Cole are the only two pitchers more talented than Ryu. But with that being said, there's always seems to be just one pitcher who surprises people. Last year was Maeda, but young guys, just pitchers like Lance Lynn last year who seem to break through. So I think Ryu will have a good season, but to say and predict that he's going to be the American League Cy Young, I mean, I just think there's too many factors. So for that one, I'm going to say no. Next up, we have Nate Pearson will have a sub 3.5 ERA. Now, we only saw Nate Pearson last year for for 5 starts, and he had like a 6 ERA. He had some flashes of being really good, but he battled some injuries, and he still needs to get his command in check. He has great stuff with his slider, and obviously in terms of the velocity with his fastball. I think Nate Pearson, a lot of Blue Jays fans will be expecting him to have a big breakthrough year. But the thing that worries me about Nate Pearson is what's going to happen because he hasn't been stretched out over the course of his career. So like I mentioned in past videos, what's going to happen come August, September, October, when the Jays really have to be careful with him and the innings that he pitches and be careful about monitoring his arm, especially assuming that they are going to need him come October and the MLB postseason. I think Nate Pearson still lacks the experience. If he can get the command together, I could definitely see it happening. But I say that Nate Pearson probably will be close to the 3.5 ERA, but I think he will be just above it. Next up, we have Bichette will get votes for the AL MVP award. Now, Bichette, when he was healthy last season, was fantastic at the top of the lineup for the Toronto Blue Jays. And I think me and a lot of other Blue Jays fans really expect Bichette to take that next step this year, especially with the added protection in this lineup with George Springer. With that being said, There's a lot of talented players in the American League. I mean, Trout's always in there. There's a whole bunch of other guys. And I think the big thing about Bichette is percentage of balls that he swings at outside of the strikeout zone, right? We know Bichette has the power. He's shown flashes of decent defense, even though he makes a bunch of errors. But the thing is he needs to get that on-base percentage up, and he won't be able to do that until he stops swinging at at balls outside of the strike zone. He needs to be able to walk a bit more. I don't think Bichette is going to be the AL MVP, even though he is going to take a step forward this year, in my opinion. I think his home run numbers will be up. I probably think his OBP numbers will be up as well, and if Bichette can clean up those errors, I think he's one of the top shortstops in the American League with a very bright future. But the statement was Bichette gets votes for AL MVP. I do think, based on what we saw last season, even though it was a shortened season and Bichette was hurt for part of it, I do think he will be good enough to get AL MVP votes. Next up, we have Springer hits 40 home runs. Now, last year isn't a good reference because it was a shortened season, and say what you will about the Astros in the scandal, but in his last full season in 2019, George Springer hit, I think it was 39 home runs. So he would need to set his career high in this season in order to reach 40. Ton of power in the Blue Jays lineup. I don't think necessarily Springer is going to be pitched around, but I think if you do pitch around anybody in the Blue Jays lineup, it is going to be George Springer. I think even though Vlad Guerrero, Beshet, you have Simeon in that lineup, who I think will all take a step forward and play a bit better than they did last year in terms of this year. I think Springer, and saying he's going to reach 40 home runs, is just too much of a reach. I would put him around 35, maybe a bit lower at like a 33 type mark. But with that being said, I think Springer is going to be absolutely fantastic for the Toronto Blue Jays. Next up, we have Marcus Semien bounces back, and because of that, the Toronto Blue Jays lead the American League in home runs. So we will start with Semien. Now, Semien had a down year last year, especially in terms of his average. But this is a guy in 2019 who hit 33 home runs and was third in American League MVP voting with a higher WAR than Mike Trout. Now, I think, there's different things that quantify Marcus Semien bouncing back this year. Because do I think he's going to be back to third in American League MVP votings with 35 home runs? Probably not. But, he's probably going to bat 6 or 7 for the Blue Jays near the second half of that lineup. And the Jays, if they get 25, 30 home runs from him, the Jays are really, really living large with that 1 year, $18 million deal. That would be a fantastic signing for the Blue Jays. So I think my answer to that first part of the question of will Semien bounce back, he'll bounce back in the context of what the Blue Jays need him to do, but he won't necessarily be back to where he was in 2019, but he will be better than he was in 2020. That being said, the Blue Jays will have a lot of home run hitters in this lineup. You look up and down the lineup, even Danny Jansen, who's probably going to be batting 9, all guys who can hit 20-plus home runs. And even Danny Jansen, who's been inconsistent at the plate, is a guy who could easily hit 20, maybe even 25 home runs if he really, really figures it out at the plate. But the Yankees have a ton of power, obviously. The Minnesota Twins have a ton of power. I could see the Blue Jays being top 3. I don't see them beating out the Yankees, but I definitely could see them being second in the American League. Next, we have Rowdy Tellez breaks through. Now, Rowdy Tellez was really good in the time that he did play last year. This is a guy who essentially split time, but a lot of Blue Jays fans wanted to see him in the lineup. I think that he will split time between DH and first base with Vlad Guerrero this year, so we might see him a bit more in the lineup. This was a guy who was in the upper end on the Blue Jays in offensive WAR and total WAR, and was actually quite impressive for the time that, he spent in the lineup. That being said, I think this is really similar to the Semien question, and it depends on the way that you look at what it means for Rowdy Tellez to break through. Because I think Rowdy Tellez has shown that he can be productive at the plate. He's a great hitter with a ton of power, but for Rowdy Tellez at this point in his career to really break through, I think he would need to be a full-time player, and I don't think he's going to get that from the Toronto Blue Jays, even though he's going to be playing more. So I think he's going to, again, be a really productive player for the Blue Jays, but it really depends on what you mean by Rowdy Tellez breaking through. We got 3 more. Kirby Yates with 40-plus saves. Now, Kirby Yates put up 41 saves in 2019. Didn't really pitch last year. Was fantastic in 2018 and 2019. I think that the Blue Jays mismanaged their bullpen last year, but Delis, Romano, Yates in the 7, 8, 9 innings is pretty shut down. I think, though, 40 saves comes down to will Kirby Yates play for the full season in terms of his health? Will the Blue Jays win enough games and have enough close games for him to get the 40 saves? And will they ever try to put a guy like Romano in the closing position? So for that reason, there's just too many factors. I say Kirby Yates will not get 40 saves. We have Robbie Ray post a sub 3.5 ERA. Now, Robbie Ray is a guy who's always had decent expectations over the course of his career. He's a guy that the Blue Jays got with hopes of getting back to where he was. I think it was in 2016, but he's more of a project for the Blue Jays. Now, in a rotation that has a ton of questions, you'd love for Robbie Ray to really break through this year, but I don't think it's going to happen. So I would say he does not have a sub 3.5 ERA. And finally, we have the Jays winning the American League East. Now, I think the AL East is an arms race between three teams with the Yankees, the Rays, and the Toronto Blue Jays. I think at this point in time, as I mentioned in past videos, the Yankees are still the favorites. But I think if the Blue Jays add a number 2 starter, I don't think you would be able to call it surprising if the Blue Jays did end up winning the AL East. I'd feel pretty comfortable saying, that they would end up making a wild card spot. Probably number 2. I think 3 playoff teams are coming from this division in the Yankees, Rays, and the Blue Jays. But I think the Yankees are still the favorites, and I would probably put Rays at number 2 as well. But I would not be surprised if the Blue Jays did make a push. If you guys made it to this point in the video, thank you. Let me know your thoughts on these bold predictions down in the comment section below. Let me know which ones you think I got right and which ones you think I got wrong. If you did enjoy today's video, make sure to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to Touchdowns to Home Runs for more content just like this. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and hope to see you again next time.